The marble halls of the downtown courthouse fell silent as Judge Michael Chen entered Courtroom 4B, his footsteps echoing against the polished floor. The weight of the day's proceedings pressed heavily upon his shoulders, wrapped in the familiar black fabric of his judicial robe. This was no ordinary trial. The state versus Marcus Palmer had captured the city's attention for weeks, with news vans perpetually camped outside the courthouse steps. As he settled into his high-backed leather chair, Chen noticed something different. A slight irritation at his neck, barely perceptible but persistent. Like a whispered secret demanding attention, the gallery was packed, every bench filled with spectators and reporters, their pens poised to document every word of the concluding testimony in this high-profile murder case. "Bring in the jury," Chen commanded, trying to ignore the increasing discomfort. As the jury filed in, their faces grave with the responsibility they carried, he reached up to adjust his collar. That's when it happened. The golden band of his wedding ring caught on something, a loose thread perhaps, creating an unexpected snag in the worn fabric. Detective Sarah Martinez was on the stand, preparing to deliver crucial ballistics evidence that could seal Palmer's fate, but Chen found his attention divided, his eyes drawn to the small imperfection his ring had revealed. 15 years he'd worn this robe, through countless cases, through decisions that had altered lives forever. How had he never noticed the delicate embroidery hidden beneath the collar? In the muted light of the courtroom, he could just make out the numbers. 847. Not a manufacturer's tag, no, this was something else entirely. The stitching was too precise, too intentional. And below it, so small he might have missed it entirely, a golden butterfly, its wings caught mid-flight in thread that still somehow managed to catch the light. "Your Honor?" Martinez's voice cut through his distraction. The courtroom waited, all eyes fixed upon him. Chen straightened, acutely aware of the responsibility he carried. "Please proceed, Detective." As Martinez began her testimony about bullet trajectories and powder residue, Chen's mind kept returning to the mystery sewn into his collar. The robe had always been more than mere fabric to him. It represented the weight of justice, the solemn duty he'd sworn to uphold. But now it felt different, as if those hidden numbers and that tiny butterfly had transformed it into something more personal, more human. The testimony continued, but Chen found himself hyper-aware of every brush of fabric against his skin. Each movement seemed to remind him of the unknown hands that had crafted this garment, this symbol of judicial authority. Who had sewn these markings? What did they mean? And why, after 15 years, were they choosing this moment to make themselves known? Palmer sat at the defense table, his future hanging by a thread as delicate as the one that had caught Chen's ring. The irony wasn't lost on the judge. Here he was, presiding over a case where the smallest details could mean the difference between freedom and life imprisonment, and he couldn't stop thinking about a tiny butterfly stitched into his robe. As the morning session drew to a close, Chen made a decision. He would find out who made this robe, understand why they had marked it so distinctively. But first, he had to focus on the case at hand. Justice demanded his full attention, even as the mystery of number 847 tugged at his thoughts like that persistent loose thread at his neck. The bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise." As the courtroom stood, Chen felt the familiar weight of his robe shift across his shoulders. Whatever secrets it held would have to wait. For now, there was justice to be served, though he couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, the two mysteries might be intertwined. The courthouse basement smelled of aged paper and forgotten dreams. Judge Chen stood in the doorway of the procurement office, watching as Linda Martinez, the aging records keeper, rummaged through metal filing cabinets that hadn't seen daylight in decades. The fluorescent lights above flickered erratically, casting strange shadows across boxes labeled with years long past. "You know, Judge Chen, most people who come down here are looking for evidence files, not clothing records," Linda said, her voice muffled as she disappeared deeper into the cramped room. "Especially not in the middle of a murder trial." Chen absently touched the collar of his robe, where the number 847 lay hidden. The morning's testimony still weighed heavily on his mind. Detective Martinez's ballistics report had left more questions than answers. Yet here he was, spending his lunch hour chasing the mystery of his robe instead of reviewing his notes. Last January's flood damaged most of our older files, Linda continued, emerging with a water-stained cardboard box. The whole basement was under 3 feet of water. We lost decades of records. She placed the box on a metal desk, sending up a cloud of dust that danced in the weak light. Chen's heart sank. Nothing survived. Linda pulled out a handful of warped papers, handling them as carefully as ancient manuscripts. Well, we managed to salvage some things. Let's see, 2009, that's too recent. 1995, too old. She paused, squinting at a particularly damaged document. Wait a minute. She held up a receipt, its edges brown and crumbling. Through the water damage, Chen could make out a partial address in the old garment district and a faded stamp bearing the image of a butterfly. This might be what you're looking for, Linda said, carefully placing the fragile paper on the desk. It's from the right time period, and look, she pointed to a series of numbers in the corner. There's an inventory list. Numbers 800 through 850. Chen leaned closer, his pulse quickening. In the dim light, he could just make out the street name, Orchard Avenue. The rest of the address was lost to water damage, but it was something. You really should be focusing on the Palmer case, Linda remarked, echoing his own doubts. 3 days left to reach a verdict, and this morning's testimony was complicated. She was right. The ballistics evidence had challenged everything they thought they knew about the murder. The angle of the shot, the powder residue pattern, none of it matched the prosecution's theory. Just like this receipt didn't quite match what he'd expected to find. Linda, Chen asked, studying the butterfly stamp, did all the judicial robe suppliers use this mark? She shook her head. First time I've seen it. Most of our robes came from big manufacturers, but there was a period, maybe 15-20 years ago, when we worked with smaller shops, local artisans. She smiled faintly. The judges said you could tell the difference, something about the way they felt. Chen ran his fingers along his collar again. 15 years of decisions, of lives changed forever, wrapped in fabric sewn by unknown hands. And now, in the middle of the most challenging case of his career, those hands had left him a message he couldn't ignore. Orchard Avenue, he murmured. That's in the old garment district. Linda corrected, that whole neighborhood's changed. Luxury condos, artisanal coffee shops, you know how it goes. Whatever was there 15 years ago, Judge, it's long gone. Chen carefully folded the receipt and placed it in his pocket. Outside the basement windows, rain began to fall, drumming against the glass like impatient fingers. 3 days to reach a verdict in a murder trial that grew more complex by the hour. And here he was, chasing ghosts through a gentrified neighborhood. But something about that butterfly stamp nagged at him, like a loose thread begging to be pulled. Whatever he found on Orchard Avenue, he had a feeling it would be worth the detour, even if it meant working late into the night to make up for lost time. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Orchard Avenue as Judge Chen stood before the Butterfly Bean, an artisanal coffee shop that now occupied the space where, according to the water-damaged receipt, a tailor's shop once stood. The storefront's exposed brick and minimalist signage screamed gentrification, but something about the golden butterfly painted on its window caught his attention. It was identical to the stamp on the receipt. A bell chimed softly as he pushed open the door. The aroma of freshly ground coffee beans and warm pastries replaced the stuffiness of the courthouse basement. Behind the counter, a young barista with dark curly hair was creating an intricate leaf pattern in a customer's latte. Her name tag read Sophia. "Be right with you," she called out, her focus unwavering as she finished the design. Chen took in the space, trying to imagine what it had looked like 15 years ago. The exposed ceiling pipes and polished concrete floor couldn't have been more different from a tailor's shop, yet something felt familiar. Then he noticed them. Butterflies, dozens of them, made from old fabric scraps and arranged artistically on one wall. "Those were my grandmother's," Sophia said, now standing before him. She used toe. Her voice caught as her eyes fell on his judicial robe. The metal pitcher she held slipped from her fingers, clattering against the counter. Coffee splashed across the surface, but she didn't seem to notice. Robe number 847, she whispered, her face pale. You're wearing my grandmother's butterfly robe. Chen's pulse quickened. Your grandmother made this. Sophia grabbed a cloth to wipe up the spilled coffee, her hands trembling slightly. She made all the judicial robes in this city for almost 40 years. This shop, it used to be her workshop. She paused, studying his face. But that robe, it's special. She made it the day everything changed. A customer approached the counter, but Sophia waved over her coworker. Jenny, can you cover for me? This is important. She gestured for Chen to follow her to a quiet corner of the shop. 20 years ago, she began, her voice low. My grandmother witnessed something from her workshop window. A murder, right here on Orchard Avenue. The victim was a young lawyer named Catherine Palmer. Chen felt the blood drain from his face. Palmer, the same surname as the defendant in his current case. She testified at the trial. Sophia continued, pulling out her phone and quickly searching through old photos. It was the hardest decision of her life. The accused was a powerful man, and there were threats. She found what she was looking for and held out the phone. The newspaper clipping on the screen showed a younger Maria Santos leaving a courthouse, her face partially hidden from photographers. The caption read, Key witness testifies in Palmer murder case. The date, exactly 20 years ago. She made your robe the day she decided to testify. Sophia explained, said she put everything she believed about justice into every stitch. The butterfly was her signature, but on this one, number 847, she made it in gold thread. Said it represented the truth, how it might hide for a while, but always catches the light eventually. Chen's mind raced. Marcus Palmer, the defendant in his current case, was accused of killing his business partner in almost the exact same spot where Catherine Palmer had died 20 years ago. The ballistics evidence that had troubled him that morning suddenly took on new significance. Your grandmother, he said carefully, is she still alive? Yes. Sophia's expression softened. She's at Oakwood Assisted Living on Mason Street. Still makes butterflies, though now they're mostly origami. She hesitated, then added, she always wondered who would wear robe 847. Said whoever got it would face a test of justice that would echo her own. Outside, storm clouds gathered, darkening the butterfly's shadow on the shop window. Chen touched the hidden embroidery at his collar, feeling the weight of its significance. 20 years, 2 murders, 1 location, and a robe that somehow connected them all. I need to speak with her, he said quietly. Sophia nodded, understanding in her eyes. She's been waiting for you. Oakwood Assisted Living's common room was awash in late afternoon light when Judge Chen arrived. In the corner, a petite woman with silver hair sat at a table covered in colorful paper, her weathered hands moving with practiced precision as she folded an origami butterfly. Around her, dozens of completed butterflies hung from nearly invisible threads, dancing in the air conditioning's gentle breeze. Maria Santos didn't look up when he approached. I've been folding butterflies for 3 hours, she said, her accent still strong after decades in America. Waiting for the judge who wears number 847 to finally find me. Chen stood transfixed, watching her fingers create delicate creases in the paper. Though her hands shook slightly from arthritis, each fold was perfect, deliberate. Just like the stitches in his robe. You knew I would come. I knew someone would come. These are difficult times for justice. She finished the butterfly, golden paper, he noticed, and finally looked up. Her dark eyes were sharp, alert, taking in every detail of his appearance. Ah, you have questions about both murders, don't you? The one I saw, and the one you're judging now. Chen pulled up a chair, careful not to disturb the floating butterflies. How did you? I still read the papers. Marcus Palmer, accused of killing his partner near my old shop. Same street corner where Catherine Palmer died 20 years ago. She picked up another sheet of paper, this one deep blue. Not a coincidence, I think. The ballistics report in my case, Chen said carefully, suggests the shooter was positioned in a second-story window. Just like Catherine's killer. Maria's hands stilled. I was hemming a judge's robe when I saw it happen. Second-story window gives the perfect view of that corner. Perfect angle for a shot, too. That's why I chose that workshop, you know. I like to watch over the street while I worked. Never thought I'd watch someone die there. She resumed folding, but her movements were different now, more urgent. The day I decided to testify, I started your robe. Every stitch was a promise to speak the truth, no matter the cost. The golden butterfly. She touched his collar gently, binding the embroidery without hesitation. That was for Catherine. She wore yellow the day she died. The man who killed her, chin pressed gently, was he ever caught? Maria's laugh was bitter. Oh, he was caught. Richard Palmer, Catherine's brother-in-law. But money talks, evidence disappears, witnesses change their minds. All except one stubborn old seamstress who wouldn't take a bribe. She held up the completed blue butterfly. He served only 5 years, got out and rebuilt his business empire. I believe you've heard of Palmer Enterprises. Chen felt his blood run cold. Palmer Enterprises, Marcus Palmer's company. The victim in his current case had been Marcus's business partner, who had threatened to expose financial irregularities just days before his death. Richard Palmer died last year, Maria continued, starting another butterfly. Heart attack in his sleep. Too peaceful a death for such a man. But his nephew Marcus, he learned everything from his uncle, including, I suspect, how to make problems disappear. She stood suddenly, moving with surprising agility to a small cabinet. From it, she withdrew a worn leather notebook. I kept records of every robe I made, the thread types, the measurements, the special details. But in the back, she opened it to reveal newspaper clippings, photographs, handwritten notes. I kept other records too. Things about the Palmers that nobody else thought to save. Outside, thunder rumbled. Maria looked up at her hanging butterflies, now casting complex shadows in the dimming light. You have 2 days left to render your verdict, Judge Chen. Perhaps it's time you knew what really happened 20 years ago, and why history seems to be repeating itself on that street corner. Maria's leather notebook lay open between them, its pages yellow with age. Thunder continued to roll outside as she turned to a newspaper clipping dated 20 years ago. The headline read, Palmer Family Feud. Missing documents key to murder case. Before I tell you about Catherine's murder, Maria said, her fingers tracing the headline, you need to understand why I started making judicial robes in the first place. She turned to the window, where rain now streaked the glass like tears. In my country, judges were bought as easily as bread. My father, a small-town magistrate, refused a bribe from a powerful family. 1 week later, he disappeared. Chen watched as she pulled a faded photograph from between the notebook's pages. A young woman standing proudly before a shop window, the same golden butterfly visible on its sign. When I came to America, I swore I would serve justice in my own way. Every robe I made carried that promise. But robe 847. She paused, touching the fabric of Chen's sleeve. That one was different. Because of what you witnessed? Chen asked softly. Because of what I knew. Maria's voice hardened. Catherine Palmer wasn't just Richard Palmer's sister-in-law. She was his company's legal counsel, and she had discovered something. Something in the company books that made her start carrying a gun. She pulled out another document, a photocopy of a handwritten letter. She gave me this the day before she died. Said if anything happened to her, I should give it to the right judge. Chen's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the letter. The paper was pristine, protected in a plastic sleeve for 2 decades. Catherine's handwriting was sharp, urgent. The money isn't just missing. It's being used to fund something worse. RP has connections to organized crime, using company funds to launder money through shell corporations. Evidence in safe deposit box 847. 847, Chen breathed. The number you gave my robe. Maria nodded. I testified about the shooting, yes. But I never told anyone about this letter. Richard Palmer was too powerful. His connections, too dangerous. I waited, watched, documented everything. She turned more pages in her notebook, revealing carefully organized notes about Palmer Enterprises spanning 20 years. After Richard died, Marcus took control. The same shell corporations remained active. The same patterns continued. Lightning flashed, illuminating the origami butterflies above them. In that brief, bright moment, their shadows formed a pattern on the wall that looked almost like a web. Your current case, Maria continued. Marcus Palmer's business partner wasn't just threatening to expose financial irregularities, was he? Chen thought back to the evidence he reviewed that morning. He had compiled a report about suspicious international transactions. History repeats itself, Maria said quietly, but this time, we have something we didn't have before. She reached into the notebook's back pocket and withdrew a small key, its brass surface dulled with age. Catherine's safe deposit box. I never knew which bank it was in, but I kept searching. Last month, Sophia found a receipt in my old shop's walls during renovations. Metropolitan Bank, downtown branch. Chen's mind raced. The ballistics evidence that had troubled him suddenly made sense. The shooter's position, the angle, all of it matched Catherine's murder because it was meant to. Marcus Palmer wasn't just copying his uncle's crime. He was using it to send a message. Tomorrow is the 20th anniversary of Catherine's death, Maria said, pressing the key into Chen's hand. The perfect time for old secrets to finally come to light. But be careful, Judge Chen. The Palmers didn't survive this long by leaving loose ends. She glanced meaningfully at his robe. Sometimes the strongest threads are the ones that can hang you. Metropolitan Bank's downtown branch stood silent in the growing dusk, its marble facade slick with rain. Judge Chen sat in his parked car, Catherine Palmer's safe deposit key heavy in his pocket. The storm had intensified, sheets of water distorting the streetlights into watery halos. According to his watch, he had exactly 15 minutes until the bank's closing time. His phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. Grandmother wants you to know. Check the back seam first. Chen frowned, running his fingers along his robe's back seam. There, barely detectable, he felt a pattern of tiny knots. He'd assumed they were random irregularities, but now, remembering Maria's words about encoded messages, he began counting them. 3 knots, a space, 4 knots, another space, 7 knots. 3 to 4 7. His hands shook as he pulled out Maria's notebook, flipping to a page he photographed earlier. There, in her meticulous handwriting, was a key to her stitching code. Numbers represented letters, each group forming a word. He counted again, this time converting the pattern. The message read, "Truth hides deeper." The bank's lights flickered, reminding him of the approaching closing time. Chen grabbed his briefcase and rushed through the rain, reaching the heavy bronze doors just as a security guard was preparing to lock them. I need access to a safe deposit box, Chen said, showing his judicial ID. It's an urgent matter related to an ongoing case. Minutes later, he sat in a private viewing room, box 847 before him. His robe dripped quietly onto the tile floor, each drop echoing in the silence. With careful hands, he inserted Catherine's key alongside the bank's master key. The box's hinges creaked as he lifted the lid. Inside lay a single manila envelope, sealed with red wax bearing the impression of a butterfly. Chen's breath caught, the same butterfly that Maria had sewn into his robe, that Sophia had painted on her coffee shop window. But before he could break the seal, his phone buzzed again. This time, a call from Detective Martinez. Judge Chen, we've got a problem. Someone broke into the courthouse basement an hour ago. They went straight for the procurement office. Linda's been taken to the hospital. Chen's blood ran cold. The records. Gone. All the files about judicial robes. Everything from that time period. But here's the strange part. They left a butterfly made of golden paper on Linda's desk. A warning. They knew he was getting close. Chen looked again at the envelope in his hands, then at his reflection in the viewing room's window. In the dim light, he could just make out more of Maria's hidden knots along his sleeve. Grabbing a pencil, he began transcribing the pattern, converting numbers to letters. A new message emerged, Palmer Vault basement level. His phone buzzed one final time. Sophia again, grandmother says to tell you, your robe has one more secret. The golden butterfly isn't just decoration, it's a key. Chen examined the embroidered butterfly at his collar. In the bright fluorescent light of the viewing room, he noticed something he'd missed before. The golden threads formed more than just a butterfly, they formed a complex pattern, almost like The blueprint, he whispered. The butterfly wasn't just Maria's signature. It was a detailed diagram of Palmer Enterprises' original building layout, showing a hidden vault beneath the main basement. A vault where, according to Catherine's letter, Richard Palmer had kept evidence of his criminal empire. Evidence his nephew Marcus would kill to keep buried. Thunder cracked overhead as Chen carefully resealed the safe deposit box. He had what he needed now, the truth sewn into his very robes, and evidence of a 20-year conspiracy about to unravel. But first, he needed to check on Linda. He touched the golden butterfly one last time, silently thanking Maria for her foresight. The old seamstress hadn't just made judicial robes. She'd been weaving a web of justice, one stitch at a time, waiting for the right moment to pull all the threads together. The hospital corridors were eerily quiet at this late hour. Judge Chen found Linda in a private room, her face bruised but her spirit unbroken. She was sitting up in bed, an origami butterfly, this one made of simple white paper, clutched in her trembling hands. Maria Santos sent this, Linda said before Chen could speak. Said you'd be coming. She smiled weakly. You know, I'd always wondered why she insisted on keeping such detailed records of every robe she made. Now I know, she was building a case, wasn't she? Chen nodded, pulling a chair close to her bed. Did you see who attacked you? No, but they knew exactly what they were looking for. Linda's voice hardened. They kept demanding to know where the original supplier contracts were, the ones with Maria's signature and banking details. But those, she managed a small defiant smile. Those I moved years ago, after Maria asked me to keep them safe. Chen leaned forward. You knew Maria. She made my daughter's wedding dress. Linda carefully unfolded the paper butterfly, revealing handwriting inside. She told me back then that someday, someone would need to know the truth about the Palmers. That's why I preserved what I could after the flood, why I kept certain records separate. Thunder rattled the hospital windows as Chen read Maria's note. The original contracts prove Palmer Enterprises was laundering money through my shop, payments for robes that were never made. Catherine found the discrepancy. Now you must find the vault. His phone buzzed. Detective Martinez again. Judge, we've got movement at the Palmer building. Marcus Palmer arrived 10 minutes ago with 2 security teams. They're moving something from the basement level. Chen looked at his robe, at the golden butterfly that held the building's secrets. Detective, I need a warrant. The evidence we need is in a hidden vault beneath the main basement. Catherine Palmer's letter from the safe deposit box gets us probable cause. Already done, Martinez replied. SWAT team is on standby. But Chen, be careful. We just found out Linda's attacker left something else besides the butterfly, a bullet casing. Ballistics match both Palmer murders. Linda touched Chen's sleeve. Go. But first, look at how this butterfly is folded. She held up Maria's message. Every fold marks a number. It's the vault combination. Maria must have seen Richard Palmer enter it the day Catherine died. Chen quickly copied down the sequence. As he stood to leave, Linda caught his hand. Judge Chen, that roll. Maria always said 847 would be her masterpiece. Said it would carry justice in every thread. Make it count. The drive to Palmer Enterprises took exactly 7 minutes. Police units were already in position, hidden in the shadows around the building. Rain continued to pour as Chen studied the golden butterfly on his collar one final time, memorizing the vault's location. His phone lit up with a text from Sophia. Grandmother says remember, the truth, like a butterfly, emerges only when the time is right. Chen thought of Catherine Palmer, of Maria watching from her window, of Linda protecting records for decades. 3 women, each keeping a piece of the puzzle, waiting for this moment. He touched the worn fabric of his robe, feeling the weight of their trust, their sacrifice, their unwavering belief in justice. Detective Martinez appeared at his car window. SWAT's ready. Motion sensors showed 3 people in the vault area. They're removing documents. Chen stepped out into the rain, his robe billowing in the wind. Tomorrow, he would deliver his verdict in Marcus Palmer's murder trial. But tonight, he would ensure that a 20-year-old crime finally saw justice. He nodded to Martinez. Let's go find out what the Palmers have been hiding. Courtroom 4B was packed beyond capacity the next morning. Judge Chen sat in his chambers, watching the sunrise through rain-streaked windows. His robe, still damp from the previous night's events, hung nearby, the golden butterfly catching the first light of dawn. The events at Palmer Enterprises had lasted well into the night. The vault, hidden exactly where Maria's embroidered blueprint indicated, had yielded 2 decades of incriminating evidence: laundered money, forged contracts, and a hidden ledger documenting every crime the Palmer family had orchestrated through their legitimate business facade. But the most standing piece of evidence had been found in Marcus Palmer's own briefcase, Catherine Palmer's original notes, preserved for 20 years, detailing the criminal empire she'd discovered. The same evidence that had cost her her life. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Sophia entered, carrying a carefully wrapped package. "Grandmother wanted you to have this before you deliver your verdict," she said, placing it on his desk. Inside lay a new judicial robe, pristine black fabric gleaming in the morning light. On its collar, another golden butterfly. But this one was different, incorporating threads from his old robe's embroidery. "She stayed up all night making it," Sophia explained. "Said a judge who honors the truth deserves a robe that carries its own history forward." Chen touched the new butterfly, feeling the familiar threads woven into its pattern. "How is she?" "Peaceful. The doctors at Oakwood said they'd never seen her so energetic. She's been teaching the other residents how to fold paper butterflies." Sophia smiled. "She said to tell you that sometimes justice, like a well-made robe, simply needs time for all the pieces to be sewn together properly." The courthouse bells chimed 9 times. In minutes, he would deliver his verdict in Marcus Palmer's murder trial, though after last night's discoveries, the prosecution was already preparing additional charges against not just Marcus, but half a dozen Palmer Enterprises executives. Detective Martinez had called earlier. Linda's attacker had confessed, revealing himself as a former Palmer employee who'd been involved in Catherine's murder. The evidence from the vault had already corroborated his story. Chen changed into the new robe, feeling its perfect fit. In its pocket, he found one last origami butterfly, unfolded it to reveal Maria's message: "Justice, like a butterfly, transforms darkness into light." The bailiff knocked. "They're ready, Your Honor." Chen entered courtroom 4B to a hushed silence. Marcus Palmer stood at the defense table, his composure cracking as he noticed the golden butterfly on the judge's new robe. In the gallery, Chen spotted Maria, surrounded by a small army of supporters: Sophia, Linda in a wheelchair, Detective Martinez, and dozens of other judicial robe wearers, each bearing their own numbered creation. "Before I deliver my verdict," Chen began, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom, "I want to acknowledge something about this robe I wear. It was crafted by hands that believed in justice so deeply, they wove that belief into every stitch. For 20 years, those stitches held secrets that would finally bring truth to light." He paused, looking directly at Maria. "The evidence uncovered last night will be addressed in future proceedings. But today, regarding the murder charge before this court." He turned to Marcus Palmer. "The jury has reached a verdict, and I have reviewed it. But more importantly, justice has reached its verdict." The golden butterfly seemed to shimmer as he continued, its threads catching the light just as Maria had intended, a symbol of truth emerging from darkness, of justice finally taking flight. In the case of the state versus Marcus Palmer, this court finds the defendant. Outside, the storm clouds finally parted, sending shafts of sunlight through the courthouse windows. They illuminated the gallery of robed judges, each garment a testament to one woman's unwavering faith and justice, each stitch a thread in the larger tapestry of truth. And in that moment, as Chen delivered the verdict, Maria Santos smiled, knowing that her greatest creation, Robe 847, had finally fulfilled its purpose.